The day the Emperor's daughters arrived on Earth, the skies over the human city shimmered with unfamiliar light. Massive ships, elegant and alien, hovered silently above the planet's atmosphere, casting shadows that moved like slow, deliberate fingers across the streets. People stopped, pointing and whispering. The human government had prepared for an official reception, but no one had expected the daughters themselves to descend first, without a single word from their father. The three women who stepped out were unlike anyone the humans had ever seen. Tall, poised, with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. They carried themselves with a grace that suggested both authority and danger. Their attire shimmered like metal woven with silk, and the emblem of their emperor glowed faintly on their chest plates. They were not soldiers exactly, yet there was a power in the way they moved, a power that spoke of generations of training and command. On the ground, the human strategist assigned to guide them, Captain Elias Renner, waited. He was an experienced officer, known for leading small teams against hostile forces, and for thinking in ways that others could not. Today, his task was different. He was not to command nor to fight, but to teach and to challenge these three daughters of an emperor who was known across the galaxy for his ruthless cunning. He had been told, bluntly, that the daughters were sent to Earth for correction, a strange word that carried weight he could not yet measure. Captain Renner, the tallest daughter said, her voice clear and without accent.
You will instruct us. Make us capable.
There was a subtle threat hidden in her words, though her tone was polite. Elias nodded.
We will see how capable you are,
he said, his tone equally calm. Inside, his mind raced. He had trained elite soldiers before, humans and aliens alike. But these were not ordinary students. They were heirs to an empire, each expected to rule and lead vast fleets. He had to ensure that Earth remained safe, while teaching them the human way. The first exercise was simple in appearance, but deadly in intent. Elias led them to a vast training ground, a mix of wild forest and rocky hills that had been preserved to simulate Earth's untamed regions. Automated drones hovered in the air, ready to simulate threats. The daughters looked unimpressed, scanning the terrain with a critical eye. Your first challenge is survival, Elias explained. You will navigate this environment using only your instincts and intellect. No advanced devices, no communication with your ships. You will rely on yourselves and the resources around you. A faint smile appeared on the second daughter's face. You mean like hunting? She asked. Her eyes glinted with amusement. Not hunting, Elias said. Surviving, adapting, and solving problems. The Earth does not bend to power or technology. It responds to cleverness, flexibility, and cooperation. The daughters exchanged glances but did not argue. They stepped into the wilds with a grace that seemed effortless. At first, they moved with precision, assessing the terrain and calculating each step. But soon the challenges became more unpredictable. Automated predators simulated attacks, sudden weather changes tested their adaptability, and hidden puzzles forced them to think creatively. By the end of the day, they had encountered failures. The eldest daughter, Erin, underestimated the speed of a mechanical predator and barely escaped. The youngest, Lyra, ignored a pattern in the terrain and triggered a harmless but disorienting trap. Only the middle daughter, Ceres, moved without error, relying on careful observation and her patience. As night fell, Elias gathered them around a fire he had started. The daughters' expressions had shifted. Pride had not been lost, but respect had begun to creep in. The firelight danced on their faces, highlighting small signs of exhaustion, a rarity for beings trained to perfection. Humans endure what you might consider minor inconvenience, Elias said, throwing a stick into the fire. We make mistakes, we fail, and we adapt. The Earth tests you not because it is cruel, but because it does not forgive arrogance.
The daughters did not respond immediately.
Then Erin spoke, her voice quieter than before. We are not used to being tested this way. Power often opens doors for us. Here, it changes nothing. We cannot command the wild to bend. Elias nodded.
Exactly. You must understand that leadership is more than orders.
Sometimes it is knowing when to follow, when to wait, and when to act. You cannot force the outcome. You must guide it. The night passed, filled with discussions about strategy, survival, and human history. Elias spoke of battles humans had fought, not because of advanced technology, but because of ingenuity, courage, and determination. He told stories of small squads defeating overwhelming enemies by using traps, deception, and understanding human nature. The daughters listened, occasionally interrupting with questions that revealed their curiosity. They asked about decisions humans had made, the ethics behind certain actions, and the balance between risk and reward. For the first time, Elias saw something shift in them, not weakness, but a spark of understanding. The next morning brought a new test. Elias led them to a complex urban environment, abandoned buildings now used for tactical simulations. Here the challenge was not survival against nature, but against strategy, teamwork, and unpredictable threats. Drones simulated hostile forces, but they were clever, unpredictable, and adaptive, just like real humans. The daughters initially approached the challenge as they had before, calculated, precise, confident. But they quickly realized that the environment was not static. Civilians simulated by holograms moved unpredictably. Obstacles appeared without warning, and their usual methods of command fell short. Elias observed quietly, letting them struggle before offering guidance. Your strategies must change. You cannot rely solely on prediction or force. Sometimes you must improvise. Sometimes you must observe before acting. And sometimes you must trust others to lead in ways you cannot foresee. The daughters hesitated. It was difficult for them to accept a human as an equal, much less as a teacher. Yet, the results began to speak for themselves. In one simulation, Saris adapted quickly to a sudden ambush, using rubble and shadows to mislead the drones. In another, Lyra communicated subtly with a holographic civilian, ensuring safe passage for the team. Aaron, who had struggled the previous day, finally saw the value in observation and patience. By midday, the three daughters had begun to work together, not just as students, but as learners, absorbing a new philosophy of leadership. They still retained their imperial pride, but there was a growing humility that came from experiencing the unpredictability of Earth firsthand. Elias knew this was the turning point. The daughters were beginning to see humans not as primitive, but as clever, adaptable, and morally complex beings. And in that realization lay the true purpose of their visit. They were not here merely to be corrected. They were here to witness humanity's strength, the strength that had allowed them to survive, innovate, and thrive in a galaxy that often underestimated them. As the sun set, Elias gathered the daughters for reflection. Today you have learned the first lesson. Power is meaningless without wisdom. Authority cannot replace understanding, and pride, unchecked, is the greatest weakness of all. The daughters listened, their expressions unreadable. Yet, when Elias looked into their eyes, he saw a flicker of something new. Curiosity tempered with respect, a willingness to adapt, and an unspoken acknowledgement that humans had lessons to offer that no empire could teach. For the first time, Erin spoke without challenge. "We underestimated your world," she admitted quietly. "There is depth here, strength we did not anticipate." Elias allowed himself a small nod. "You have only begun to scratch the surface. Tomorrow the challenges will increase. You will face situations where your training may fail, where instinct must guide you more than skill. But if you remember today, you will survive, and perhaps even thrive." The daughters exchanged glances, each silently processing the words. There was tension, yes, but also anticipation. They were beginning to understand that Earth demanded more than obedience or command. It demanded intelligence, creativity, and courage. the very qualities that defined humanity. As they settled to rest that night, under alien skies, Elias could not help but wonder what the Emperor had intended. Had he sent them to be corrected, or had he underestimated the lessons they themselves would carry back? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. By the end of this visit, the daughters would not return as they had arrived. They would be changed, carrying within them the seeds of human ingenuity, the essence of resilience, and the lessons of survival that no empire could teach. And Earth, in turn, would gain something far greater than diplomatic favor. It would gain recognition as a civilization capable of teaching even the most powerful of rulers. The sun rose over the Earth's training grounds with a golden haze that shimmered across the trees and rocks. Elias watched the three daughters move with purpose through the clearing. They had grown visibly stronger since the first day. Confidence replaced hesitation, though pride still lingered in their expressions. They were no longer novices. They were learners, absorbing a new way of thinking. And today, Elias had planned a challenge that would push them beyond anything they had faced so far. The mission was deceptively simple. Elias led them to an abandoned urban sector several miles from the main base. Crumbling buildings and shattered streets were strewn with obstacles. Holographic civilians moved unpredictably, and automated drones simulated hostile forces. The goal was clear: navigate the city, protect the civilians, and reach the evacuation point. But the environment was dynamic. Buildings could collapse, drones would change patterns without warning, and the holograms behaved in ways that mimicked real human reactions. Elias turned to the daughters. Today, you face chaos. The rules will change without warning. You cannot predict everything. Your success depends on observation, strategy, and cooperation. Remember, you are not in command. You are part of a team. Saris nodded quietly, already scanning the area. Lyra adjusted her stance, calculating angles and possible paths. Erin, the eldest, clenched her jaw, clearly ready to impose her will, though she had begun to realize that sheer authority might not be enough here. The challenge began. Immediately, the daughters encountered their first obstacle. The holographic crowd panicked near a collapsed bridge. Some moved toward danger, others froze in confusion. Drones simulated rioters, circling the area with precision, testing their reflexes. Ceres quickly took the lead, issuing concise instructions to the others. Block the path here. Guide civilians to the alley. Lyra, cover our rear. It was a small victory, but the daughters felt the sting of difficulty. The drones adapted to their moves, and the holograms continued to act unpredictably. This was not a battle they could fight with raw strength or imperial authority. They needed the human way: creativity, adaptation, and teamwork. Hours passed and the challenges escalated. An entire building collapsed without warning, forcing them to reroute the civilians while avoiding falling debris. A sudden simulated fire broke out in another sector, and drones swooped in from above, mimicking enemy forces trying to exploit the chaos. The daughters had to make split-second decisions. Erin tried to take command as she might in her own empire, barking orders and expecting obedience, but humans do not follow by fear alone. And the holograms refused to behave predictably. The plan failed in places, forcing her to improvise. For the first time, she experienced a profound lesson. Authority alone could not secure success. Lyra, normally the quietest of the three, surprised everyone. She adapted fluidly, predicting the drone's movements and guiding civilians using small, clever distractions. She moved with precision, observing every detail before acting. Ceres continued to analyze and direct, her calm demeanor balancing Lyra's agility and Erin's determination. By mid-afternoon, the daughters had begun to understand a crucial truth. Survival and leadership were not about giving orders. They were about anticipating, adapting, and responding. They began to communicate subtly, almost instinctively, relying on observation rather than commands. Elias observed quietly from a safe distance. He knew this was the moment when true transformation began. "Notice how humans respond," he murmured to himself. "They trust their senses, their judgment, and each other. They do not rely solely on strength, yet they achieve results that power alone cannot." Just when it seemed the daughters had mastered the urban simulation, a new test began. A rival alien faction had somehow tracked the daughters to Earth, launching a small-scale strike to capture them. Elias had anticipated this possibility, but had no idea how prepared the aliens would be. A squadron of sleek black ships descended, their weapons scanning for targets. The daughters reacted immediately. Using their newly acquired understanding of human strategy, they coordinated with Elias and his team. Erin suggested a frontal assault, her instincts from Imperial training urging her to fight. Ceres shook her head. "We are not here to fight blindly," she said. "We will outthink them." Lyra pointed to an abandoned warehouse. "We can draw them here," she said. "The terrain will favor us. We can use misdirection." Elias allowed them to take the lead. The daughters began to implement human-style tactics: diversion, camouflage, and strategic traps. Holographic civilians were moved to safety. Debris was arranged to funnel the enemy ships into narrow corridors, and false signals were sent to confuse their sensors. The aliens, confident in their superior technology, were caught off guard. Their attacks were precise but predictable, and the daughters had learned to anticipate patterns, just as humans often did in combat. One by one, the enemy drones were neutralized without casualties. The daughters executed the plan with a precision that surprised even Elias. When the last enemy drone was disabled, silence fell. The daughters, exhausted but exhilarated, looked at each other and smiled faintly. They had done something remarkable, not because of their Imperial training, but because they had embraced human strategy. Elias approached them, his expression unreadable. "Well done. Today you learned more than survival or combat. You learned the value of observation, patience, and adaptation. You have seen that intelligence and creativity can outmatch raw power." The daughters absorbed the words. Erin, the eldest, spoke first. "I understand now," she said slowly. "Our power is not absolute. Authority does not guarantee success. Strategy, insight, and flexibility matter as much as strength." Saris nodded. "And teamwork. Even the strongest cannot do everything alone." Lyra added, "And sometimes the smallest detail changes everything. Humans notice the small things." Elias smiled faintly. "Exactly."
You are beginning to understand the human way. This is only the beginning.
Tomorrow will bring new challenges, more complex, more unpredictable, and more dangerous. But if you remember what you have learned today, you will survive. The daughters retired to their quarters, but sleep did not come easily. Their minds were racing with new insights. They had been trained to command, to lead, and to dominate. Yet here they had learned humility, patience, and the power of observation. They had glimpsed a strength in humans that was subtle but formidable, a strength that came from creativity, courage, and cooperation. The next day, Elias introduced them to another test, a simulated alien attack on a human colony. This scenario was designed to push them even further, forcing them to apply what they had learned under pressure. The daughters moved through the scenario with growing confidence, improvising solutions and anticipating threats. They coordinated with human forces, directing them with a balance of authority and collaboration that impressed even the seasoned officers observing. By the end of the second day, the daughters had transformed significantly. Their movements were more measured, their decisions more deliberate, and their respect for human strategy more evident. They had begun to see that the strength of humans lay not in technology or raw power, but in their minds, their hearts, and their adaptability. Elias knew this transformation was critical. The daughters were not merely students. They were messengers, potential leaders who could carry human wisdom back to their empire. Their experiences here would influence countless decisions and policies. The seeds of change were planted, and the daughters themselves were becoming the carriers of that change. As night fell, the daughters gathered again around a small fire outside the training complex. The stars above shone brightly, and the alien ships glimmered faintly in the distance. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Erin spoke first, her voice quieter than usual. "We underestimated humans," she admitted. "We thought power and skill were enough. Here, we see something different, something remarkable." Saris nodded. "We are learning more than strategy. We are learning perspective. Leadership is not about commanding. It is about understanding, adapting, and guiding. We see that now." Lyra smiled faintly. "And the more we learn, the more we see how much we do not know." Elias listened, feeling a sense of satisfaction. The daughters were beginning to internalize the lessons that no Imperial Academy could teach. They were embracing human ingenuity, resilience, and moral insight, the very qualities that had allowed humanity to survive and thrive in a galaxy often dominated by stronger and more technologically advanced civilizations. He knew the challenges would grow harder and the stakes higher. But he also knew that the daughters were ready to face them. They were no longer just Imperial heirs. They were learners, observers, and innovators in their own right. Tomorrow their lessons would become even more personal. They would face situations that tested not only their minds, but their values, their ethics, and their ability to make choices under pressure. The real test of transformation was only beginning, and the daughters were ready. Or at least as ready as anyone could be when stepping into the unpredictable, untamed world of Earth. And somewhere high above, the Emperor watched silently. Whether he anticipated the changes that were unfolding, or whether he simply expected obedience, no one could say. But one thing was certain: his daughters would not return unchanged. They were carrying something back to the Empire that could not be measured in power or rank. They were carrying ideas, wisdom, and a new understanding of what true strength meant. And Earth quietly had claimed another victory, not through weapons or conquest, but through the subtle, unyielding force of human intellect and spirit. The following morning, the daughters awoke to an unusual calm. The training grounds, which had once echoed with the hum of drones and the shouts of simulated crises, were quiet. Elias stood waiting, a faint smile on his face. Today, he told them, there would be no simulations. Today, they would face a challenge that could not be predicted, controlled, or rehearsed. "An alien force has detected Earth's presence," Elias explained. "They are approaching. Your mission is to protect the colony and organize its evacuation if necessary. You will have no ships of your own, no reinforcements from your Emperor. You will rely entirely on human methods and on each other." The daughters exchanged uneasy glances. This was no longer a test of survival or strategy. This was real. They were about to see the consequences of human ingenuity under the pressure of life and death. Elias led them to the command center, a building with reinforced walls and advanced sensors. Holographic maps displayed the approaching fleet, small but fast ships that moved with deadly precision. The daughters studied the maps silently, calculating the threat. "Remember," Elias said, "humans win not because they have the strongest weapons, but because they can adapt. They think creatively, use the environment, and turn disadvantages into advantages. Today, you will see it in action, and you will need to apply it yourselves." The first wave of alien scouts appeared on the horizon. The daughters and Elias watched as the ships hovered above the colony, scanning for weaknesses. The humans had limited defenses: turrets, basic shields, and improvised barricades. Outgunned and outnumbered, the situation was dire. Erin instinctively reached for command. "We strike first," she said firmly. "We cannot wait." Saris held up a hand. "Good." "No," she said. "We need to observe. Aggression without understanding will lead to disaster." Lyra studied the terrain. "We can lure them," she said quietly. "Use the environment to our advantage. They will follow patterns we can predict." Elias nodded approvingly. "Good. You are beginning to think like humans. Observe, adapt, and improvise."
Now, act. The daughters took charge of the human forces, issuing orders with precision.
Aaron focused on the defensive positioning, ensuring that barricades and turrets were strategically placed. Saris monitored the enemy movements, anticipating their attacks. Lyra coordinated small squads to create diversions, using the colony's buildings and narrow streets to funnel the alien scouts into traps. The first engagement began. Alien ships fired with deadly accuracy, but the daughters had anticipated their approach. Humans darted from cover to cover, laying traps and misleading the enemy. One squad feigned retreat, drawing the scouts into a narrow alley where turrets and barricades created a choke point. The aliens, confident in their technology, were caught off guard. The daughters moved seamlessly together, communicating without words at times. Aaron, though still strong-willed, had learned to trust the other's judgment. Saris's calm observation balanced Lyra's improvisation. The humans fought with courage and creativity, turning their limited resources into deadly advantages. Despite the initial success, the aliens adapted. They shifted tactics, sending faster ships to flank the defenders. Panic rippled through the colony's population as explosions and debris filled the streets. The daughters remained focused, issuing instructions calmly and clearly. Elias observed from the command center, impressed by their growing understanding. "Notice how they remain composed," he said quietly. "They do not panic. They analyze, adapt, and act. That is human strength."
Aaron spotted a weak point in the enemy formation. "If we can redirect their path toward the river," she said, "we can trap them. The water will restrict their movement, and our barricades will hold." Saris nodded. "We need to time it carefully. Too early, and they will escape. Too late, and we risk losing civilians." Lyra added, "I can create a distraction on the other side of the colony. They will think we are retreating, and they will pursue. That will give us the opening we need." The plan was risky, but it relied on human ingenuity rather than brute force. The daughters executed it with precision. Lyra led a small squad through the streets, drawing enemy attention. Aaron guided the main force, positioning barricades and turrets at critical points. Saris coordinated the timing, ensuring that every move was synchronized. The aliens took the bait. They pursued Lyra's squad, ignoring the traps set along the river. As they entered the narrow corridor, turrets opened fire, and barricades blocked their retreat. The aliens were trapped, their numbers reduced by strategic strikes rather than direct confrontation. For a moment, the daughters allowed themselves a small sense of triumph. They had achieved something remarkable, not through overwhelming power, but through observation, planning, and clever execution. The human way had prevailed, but the victory was temporary. A larger alien fleet was approaching, far more advanced and numerous than the first. The colony's defenses were insufficient for a direct confrontation. Panic began to rise among the human population, and the daughters faced a new challenge: evacuation. Elias explained the next step. "You must evacuate the civilians safely. The aliens will follow. You cannot fight them directly. You must think creatively." Aaron's first instinct was to fight, but Ceres reminded her of the lessons learned. Strength alone will not save them. Strategy and adaptation will. Lyra studied the colony's layout. "We can create false paths," she said. "Use decoys, traps, and hidden routes. Lead them away from the main population." The daughters split their efforts. Aaron coordinated the barricades and traps. Ceres monitored the enemy fleet and adjusted plans as needed,
and Lyra guided civilians through hidden routes, using misdirection to confuse the aliens. The evacuation began. Civilians moved quickly but cautiously, following the daughter's instructions. Drones simulated alien scouts, but the daughters had prepared for every possible move. Buildings were rigged to collapse in controlled ways, creating temporary barriers that slowed enemy advance. Smoke and mirrors, both literal and technological, confused the alien sensors. The daughters worked seamlessly with the humans. They were no longer outsiders. They had become part of the team. Their imperial training had been transformed, reshaped by human ingenuity. They had learned to rely on observation, improvisation, and collaboration, qualities that no amount of rank or power could instill on their own. Hours passed, and the evacuation progressed successfully. Civilians reached safety along hidden paths, and the alien scouts were funneled into traps, sustaining losses without harming the colony's population. The daughters moved tirelessly, coordinating every detail, anticipating every challenge, and adapting to every new obstacle. By nightfall, the immediate threat had passed. The aliens had been repelled, not through overwhelming force, but through strategy, creativity, and the subtle strength of humans. The daughters stood together, exhausted but triumphant. Elias approached them. "Today you have seen the true power of human ingenuity. You have faced a real threat and succeeded, not because of weapons, not because of authority, but because of thought, observation, and adaptability." The daughters nodded, absorbing the lesson. Erin, who had begun the journey confident in power alone, spoke quietly. "We underestimated humans," she admitted. "We thought strength was everything. Here we see that intelligence, creativity, and adaptability can achieve far more," Saris added, "and collaboration. Even the strongest cannot succeed alone. Trust, timing, and understanding are as powerful as any weapon." Lyra smiled faintly. "We have learned much, and yet we see there is still more. The human way is subtle, yet formidable. We must carry these lessons forward." Elias nodded. He knew the daughters were not merely students anymore. They had become messengers, carriers of knowledge that would influence their empire. The seeds planted in the first days were now bearing fruit. As they rested that night, the daughters reflected on the day's events. They had faced a real threat, adapted in ways their imperial training had never taught, and succeeded through strategy and ingenuity. They had seen the value of observation, patience, and creative thinking, and they had begun to understand the true meaning of leadership, guiding others, making difficult choices, and acting with intelligence rather than arrogance. Above them, the stars shone brightly. Earth had not been conquered, and its people had proven their worth once more. The daughters, changed by the experience, had learned lessons that would influence not only their future, but the future of their entire empire. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more complex, more dangerous, and more personal. The daughters had begun to see that the universe was not a place to be dominated by power alone. It was a place to be understood, navigated, and respected. And humanity, in its subtle, unyielding way, had taught them this lesson. Elias watched them quietly, knowing that the real test was only beginning. The daughters had proven themselves capable, but the universe would demand more than strategy and ingenuity. It would demand courage, resilience, and the ability to make choices under pressure. And in that, he knew, humans would continue to shine. By the end of the night, the daughters had changed more than anyone could have predicted. They were no longer just heirs to an empire. They were learners, observers, and innovators. They carried within them the wisdom of humans, a wisdom that could reshape their empire and alter the course of interstellar events. The seeds planted on Earth were growing. And when the daughters returned to their father, they would carry not only experience, but the power of human thought, creativity, and resilience, a force far greater than technology or authority alone. The journey back to their emperor's empire was quiet, almost surreal. The three daughters sat in the elegant alien vessel, staring at the stars passing by in streaks of light. They had survived real danger on Earth, had led humans through threats no Imperial Academy could teach, and had seen firsthand the strength of a species often underestimated. Yet the lessons weighed heavily on them. They were not the same people who had arrived on Earth weeks ago. Erin, usually decisive and impatient, stared out of the viewing window, lost in thought. Her pride, once sharp and unyielding, had softened, replaced by understanding. Leadership was not about issuing orders or expecting obedience. It was about observation, adaptation, and guiding others through uncertainty. Ceres, calm as ever, had become more reflective. She considered not only tactics and strategy, but also the ethical weight of their decisions. The events on Earth had shown her that the smallest choices could ripple across a civilization, affecting countless lives. Lyra, the youngest, sat quietly, a faint smile playing on her lips. She had absorbed the subtleties of human ingenuity and creativity, understanding how improvisation and teamwork could turn the tide against overwhelming odds. She knew these lessons were priceless, and that carrying them back to their empire could change everything. Elias, seated nearby, watched the daughters. He understood their thoughts better than they realized. The transformation was remarkable, even for someone trained to expect the unexpected. The daughters had learned to respect humans, to see their value not in strength, but in intelligence, adaptability, and heart. And they were about to carry that understanding into a court filled with tradition, hierarchy, and expectation. When the vessel entered the imperial system, the grandeur of the Emperor's homeworld became evident. Massive cities rose like pillars of light, connected by hovering bridges and streams of energy. The palace floated above a central hub, shining with technology beyond human imagination. The daughters, though familiar with wealth and power, were still in awe, yet they felt an unease. Returning home meant facing not only their father, but also the expectations of an empire that saw them as instruments of authority, not students of human wisdom. The reception in the palace was formal and tense. Courtiers lined the hall, whispering as the daughters entered. Their father, the Emperor, stood at the center, imposing and statuesque, with eyes that seemed to pierce through their very thoughts. He had sent them to Earth expecting obedience, expecting that they would return trained, corrected, and ready to serve his vision. Instead, they returned changed. The Emperor's gaze fell on Erin first. "You have returned," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "Tell me, did you learn what you were supposed to learn?" Erin hesitated. She had to choose her words carefully. Her pride and respect for humans had tempered her usual bluntness. "Father," she began, "we have learned much, but not what we expected. We have seen strength in ways that do not rely on power or authority. We have learned that leadership is not about command alone, but about understanding, adaptation, and guiding others wisely." The Emperor's expression did not change. "You speak as if humans are equals to us," he said. "You have been away for weeks." "Do not let sentiment cloud your judgment." Ceres stepped forward. "Father, it is not sentiment. Father, it is observation. Humans survive, thrive, and innovate, not through superiority of technology alone, but through creativity, cooperation, and courage. Their strength is subtle, yet formidable. We have seen it, and it has changed the way we think," the courtiers whispered among themselves. The daughters' words were bold, challenging centuries of tradition. Some eyes gleamed with curiosity, others with suspicion. Lyra added, her voice steady but soft, "We have learned lessons that could benefit the Empire. The ways humans solve problems, adapt to unexpected threats, and work together could be applied to governance, defense, and strategy. We wish to share what we have learned, not to undermine your authority, Father, but to strengthen it." The Emperor's gaze narrowed. He had sent them expecting obedience, expecting repetition of his methods, not new insights. Yet There was a flicker of interest in his eyes. He saw the spark in his daughter's eyes, the spark that had not existed before they left. "Very well," he said finally. "Show me these lessons." The daughters began to explain. They described the challenges they had faced on Earth, navigating unpredictable terrain, leading humans through threats, and devising strategies that relied not on overwhelming power, but on ingenuity. They spoke of cooperation, observation, and improvisation. They spoke of the human way, a method rooted in flexibility, creativity, and resilience. Some courtiers scoffed. "They are not human," one whispered. "Their methods are primitive." But the emperor remained silent, listening intently. The daughters continued, detailing specific scenarios where humans had overcome superior forces through clever tactics. They showed simulations and diagrams, translating human experiences into concepts the Empire could understand. By the end of the presentation, the mood in the hall had shifted. Some courtiers were impressed, seeing potential in these lessons. Others were skeptical, clinging to tradition. But the Emperor's daughters stood firm, confident in the knowledge they had gained. The Emperor finally spoke. "You have returned carrying ideas, not merely experience. That is unexpected. I sent you for correction, yet you have brought wisdom." Aaron bowed slightly. "We have learned that power alone is fragile, Father. True strength lies in understanding, adapting, and guiding wisely. Humans have shown us this. We wish to apply it to the Empire to make it stronger, not weaker." The Emperor studied them, his eyes sharp. "You speak boldly, but I see that your experiences have changed you. Perhaps Earth has value beyond diplomacy." Over the next weeks, the daughters worked to introduce human-inspired reforms. They suggested new training programs for officers that emphasized observation, adaptability, and creative problem-solving. They proposed methods for dealing with unpredictable threats that did not rely solely on superior technology. They encouraged collaboration across departments, breaking down rigid hierarchies that had slowed the Empire's response to crises. Change was met with resistance. Many courtiers feared that human methods would undermine the established order. They argued that tradition and authority had built the Empire, and deviation could lead to chaos. Yet the daughters persisted. They demonstrated the methods in controlled scenarios, showing their effectiveness. They highlighted examples from Earth, where humans had survived overwhelming odds and succeeded against stronger opponents. Slowly, the skeptics began to see merit in these lessons. Aaron, once focused on asserting dominance, became a teacher and mediator. She guided others through the new strategies, using her authority to support innovation rather than suppress it. Saris emphasized ethics and responsibility, ensuring that new methods were applied with fairness and foresight. Lyra encouraged creativity, showing that even the smallest ideas could have a significant impact. The Emperor watched closely, his curiosity growing. He realized that the daughters were no longer merely heirs, they were catalysts for transformation. The lessons they had carried from Earth were not just practical strategies, they were a new way of thinking, one that could reshape the Empire's approach to leadership, diplomacy, and conflict. Tensions within the court remained, but the daughters' success could not be denied. Their methods improved training efficiency, increased cooperation among departments, and led to innovative solutions for complex problems. The Empire began to see the value of adaptability and creativity, qualities humans embodied naturally. The daughters themselves continued to evolve. Their time on Earth had instilled humility, patience, and respect for different perspectives. They no longer relied solely on their rank. They had learned to lead by example, to inspire trust, and to encourage collaboration. Their transformation was evident to all who observed them. One evening, the daughters stood together in the palace gardens, reflecting on the changes they had initiated. The city below glowed with the energy of progress, a symbol of what could be achieved when tradition and innovation worked together. Aaron spoke first. "We have accomplished much, but the Empire is vast.
There is still resistance, and there will always be those who cling to old ways."
Saris nodded. "True, but we have planted seeds."
Ideas grow and change spreads, even in the most rigid systems. Humans showed us this. Their strength lies not in conquest, but in adaptability and resilience. Lyra smiled. "And we carry these seeds now. We have the chance to shape the future, to combine the best of both worlds, imperial tradition and human ingenuity." Elias, watching from nearby, felt a sense of pride. The daughters had exceeded every expectation. They had faced real danger, learned from humans, and returned not only alive but transformed. They were now capable of influencing an empire, carrying human-inspired wisdom into a civilization that had long relied on authority and power. As the night deepened, the Emperor observed his daughters. He had sent them expecting obedience, expecting correction. Instead, he had received something far more valuable: enlightened leaders who could think, adapt, and innovate. The Empire itself was changing, guided by lessons learned from a species he had once dismissed as primitive. The daughters understood that their journey was far from over. Resistance would continue, challenges would arise, and the true test of their lessons would come in situations beyond simulation or training. But for the first time, they felt a sense of purpose that went beyond power or status. They were carriers of change, bridges between civilizations, and examples of what could be achieved when knowledge, creativity, and courage were valued above all else. And somewhere deep in the corridors of the palace, plans were being made. Plans that would shape the future of the Empire, influenced by humans, and guided by the daughters who had seen the value of a species often underestimated. Months had passed since the daughters returned from Earth. The Empire, once rigid and predictable, now hummed with subtle change. The Emperor's court, initially skeptical of the human-inspired methods his daughters had introduced, was slowly adjusting. Departments collaborated where they had previously competed. Officers were trained to think creatively rather than obey blindly, and even ordinary citizens noticed small improvements in efficiency, safety, and governance. The three daughters moved through the palace with a new confidence. Their steps were calm, purposeful, carrying the quiet authority of leaders who understood not only their power, but also the responsibility that came with it. Aaron had become a master at bridging tradition with innovation, showing that the old ways could coexist with new ideas. Cirrus continued to guide ethical application, ensuring that changes benefited the many, rather than a privileged few. Lyra encouraged imagination, proving that even small insights could lead to major improvements in strategy, logistics, and diplomacy. Yet, their greatest challenge was about to arrive. The alien faction that had once tested Earth had not forgotten the daughters' presence, or the Empire's strength. They had observed the changes, and they now saw an opportunity. A fleet, larger and more advanced than any before, approached the Empire, intent on exploiting perceived weaknesses. Intelligence reports warned of coordinated attacks, sabotage attempts, and possible infiltration. The daughters knew that this time, strategy alone would not suffice. They would need the lessons of Earth in full force. Elias had been invited to advise, though he observed quietly. He knew that this test would push the daughters to their limits. It was one thing to adapt within simulations, or even small-scale engagements. It was another to apply human ingenuity to a real, large-scale interstellar threat. The daughters convened in the command center, a room that had become a hub of innovation. Holoscreens displayed the enemy fleet, and diagrams showed potential points of vulnerability. Erin spoke first, her voice calm but firm. "We have prepared defenses, but the enemy will adapt. We must think beyond technology. Humans taught us that patterns exist, but only if we look carefully. We must predict their moves without letting them anticipate ours." Saris added, "We must protect civilians, maintain morale, and adapt continuously. We cannot rely on brute force. Every plan must account for unpredictability."
Lyra smiled faintly. And we can use misdirection, diversion, and ingenuity. Small, clever actions can have big consequences. The daughters split responsibilities. Aaron focused on defensive positioning, strengthening sectors that were likely targets. Ceres coordinated intelligence, ensuring that officers had accurate information and contingency plans. Lyra worked with logistics teams, devising subtle traps, decoys, and strategies to confuse and frustrate the enemy. The first wave of the alien fleet arrived. Advanced ships moved with precision, scanning for weaknesses. Their weapons were powerful, and their tactics had been honed for conquest. Yet they had not anticipated humans, or their students. The daughters' strategies unfolded flawlessly. Drones were redirected, false signals misled the attackers, and tactical maneuvers created bottlenecks that neutralized the numerical advantage. The human-inspired methods, the lessons learned on Earth, shone brilliantly. Aaron coordinated a bold maneuver, using environmental hazards and the Empire's orbital structures to restrict enemy movement. Enemy ships became trapped in confined zones, where defensive turrets could target them with maximum efficiency. Ceres ensured that communication lines remained intact, preventing confusion and panic among the defenders. Lyra used decoys to draw enemy attention away from critical sectors, allowing evacuation teams to move civilians safely. The battle was long and intense. Explosions lit up the void as enemy ships attempted to adapt. For a moment, it seemed the daughters' plans might fail. A powerful alien cruiser breached a defensive line, threatening a critical population hub. Aaron reacted immediately, rallying units and creating a coordinated counterattack that forced the enemy ship back into a trap. Ceres made rapid adjustments to strategies in real time, ensuring that no civilians were endangered. Lyra orchestrated subtle maneuvers that disrupted enemy communications, creating confusion and delays. Every action, no matter how small, contributed to the success of the larger plan. Hours passed. The daughters remained vigilant, making split-second decisions, coordinating forces, and adapting to the enemy's every move. They were no longer just Imperial heirs. They were leaders who embodied the lessons learned on Earth: observation, adaptability, ingenuity, and collaboration. Finally, as the alien fleet retreated, it became clear that the Empire had prevailed. Losses were minimal, and the civilians were safe. The daughters had applied human-inspired strategies on a scale that even their emperor had not anticipated. The victory was not won through superior technology or raw power, but through intelligence, creativity, and coordination. The emperor convened a formal gathering to honor the daughters. Courtiers, officers, and citizens gathered in the grand hall. The emperor's voice echoed through the chamber as he spoke. "You have returned carrying not only lessons from Earth, but the wisdom to apply them across this empire. You have shown that leadership is not only authority, but understanding, observation, and ingenuity. Today, the empire stands stronger because of your efforts." Aaron stepped forward, bowing slightly. "We have learned that strength is not measured by weapons or rank alone. True power lies in guiding others, anticipating challenges, and adapting to the unexpected. Humans have shown us this, and we have applied it for the benefit of the Empire." Ceres added, "Leadership carries responsibility. Every decision affects countless lives. We have learned to weigh consequences, think creatively, and collaborate. These lessons will continue to guide us." Lyra smiled. "Innovation comes from unexpected sources. Observing and learning from others, even those we once underestimated, can shape a civilization's future. Earth has taught us this, and we carry it forward." The emperor regarded them thoughtfully. For centuries, his empire had relied on hierarchy, authority, and tradition. Yet, his daughters had proven that change could strengthen rather than weaken. Their lessons, born of human ingenuity and resilience, had reshaped not only their own thinking but the empire itself. News of the daughters' successes spread quickly. Across the empire, officers and administrators began adopting human-inspired methods. Training programs emphasized observation, adaptability, and creative problem-solving. Communication improved between sectors, and collaborative projects flourished. Even citizens began to notice improvements in efficiency, safety, and governance. The Daughter's influence extended beyond the military. Diplomacy became more nuanced, trade negotiations more strategic, and cultural exchanges more thoughtful. The lessons they had learned on Earth, of patience, collaboration, and innovative thinking, reshaped the Empire's approach to every challenge. Despite their successes, the Daughters remained humble. They knew that lessons must be applied continuously, and that true leadership required vigilance, adaptability, and reflection. They continued to study, experiment, and refine strategies, understanding that growth was an ongoing process. One evening, as they walked through the palace gardens, the Daughters reflected on their journey. Aaron spoke first. "We came to Earth expecting correction, expecting to be shaped by others. Instead, we were transformed by observation, experience, and the subtle power of humans. Our understanding of leadership and strategy has changed forever." Ceres nodded. "We carry these lessons not just as tools, but as principles. Observation, adaptability, collaboration, and creativity are as important as strength. These principles will guide the Empire toward a stronger, more resilient future." Lyra added, "And we have learned that even the smallest idea can have enormous impact. Every insight, every decision, every act of ingenuity matters. Humanity has taught us that courage and creativity can overcome challenges that seem impossible." Elias, standing nearby, felt a sense of pride and satisfaction. The Daughters had surpassed every expectation. They had faced real danger, applied human lessons on a grand scale, and transformed not only themselves, but an entire empire. The seeds planted on Earth had grown, and their influence would shape interstellar events for generations to come. The Emperor observed quietly. He had sent his daughters expecting obedience. Instead, they had returned as leaders, innovators, and teachers. They carried wisdom that no imperial academy could provide, and the Empire itself was better for it. In the months that followed, the Daughters continued to implement reforms. Officers were trained to think creatively, strategies emphasized adaptability, and diplomacy became more nuanced. The Empire grew stronger, not through conquest, but through intelligence, collaboration, and the lessons learned from a distant, underestimated species, humans. The Daughters often spoke of Earth, not only as a place of learning, but as a symbol of the power of observation, creativity, and courage. They knew that the true value of their journey lay not in the victories they had achieved, but in the enduring wisdom they carried and shared. Through their efforts, the Empire became a model of thoughtful leadership and innovation. Other civilizations took notice, respecting the Empire not merely for its strength, but for its intelligence, adaptability, and ethical governance. And humanity, quietly, had become the inspiration for change, proof that a species' value is measured not only in power or technology, but in ingenuity, resilience, and moral courage. In the end, the Daughters had achieved more than survival or correction. They had become carriers of wisdom, bridges between civilizations, and examples of what leadership truly meant. And Earth, though distant, had left an indelible mark on the Empire, proof that even the smallest seed of knowledge, when nurtured, could grow into something that changed the galaxy. The stars above shone brightly, and the Daughters stood together, looking outward. Their journey was complete, yet their influence had only just begun. They carried with them the lessons of humanity, ready to guide their empire into a future shaped by intelligence, collaboration, and ingenuity. And in that future, humans would be remembered not only as survivors, but as teachers, innovators, and catalysts for change, a species whose subtle strength had reshaped an empire and left its mark across the stars.